barrel racing?
I wanted to be a world champion barrel racer.
For more than 40 years, Reba McEntire was known as country music's safest symbol. Reliable, gracious, untouchable, she was the woman who never raised her voice, never burned bridges, never exposed the ugly truths behind Nashville's polished curtain. Even when she was hurt, replaced, or quietly erased, Reba smiled, showed up, and carried the weight alone. But then came the night no one expected her to break. At the Grand Ole Opry's milestone celebration, surrounded by legends and cameras, something inside Reba finally gave way. In an unguarded moment, she revealed that a powerful figure in the industry had deliberately worked against her, not privately, publicly, strategically. It wasn't gossip, it wasn't bitterness, it was the calm voice of someone who had been pushed too far. That single moment sent shockwaves through Nashville. Because if Reba McEntire was willing to say this out loud, the damage must have gone far deeper than anyone realized. Who could force the most gracious woman in country music to abandon a silence? And was this about one feud, or proof of a darker pattern that had followed her for decades? Tonight, we're uncovering the 5 legendary names Reba McEntire has never forgiven. Not because she's vindictive, but because some wounds are created deliberately, and a silence no longer protects the truth. The person who sits at the very top of Reba McEntire's private list of unforgivable betrayals is Tanya Tucker, not because of rivalry, not because of competition, but because the damage was done in public with intent and never taken back. For years, Reba and Tanya were presented as allies, 2 women who survived the same brutal industry, 2 voices who understood what it meant to be dismissed, underestimated, and pushed aside simply for being female in country music. Behind closed doors, they spoke openly about sexism. They shared frustrations. They understood each other. That shared history is exactly why what came next cut so deeply. In 2014, during a nationally recognized all-female tribute honoring the women who helped build country music, Reba's absence was impossible to ignore. Fans noticed immediately. Questions flooded in. Why wasn't Reba there? Instead of offering clarity or respect, Tanya answered with a single line posted publicly, "Not everyone gets an invite to the party." That sentence changed everything. By calling it a party, Tanya reduced Reba's 4 decades of contribution to something trivial. By posting it publicly, she ensured the humiliation was shared, searchable, and permanent. And by saying nothing else, she made it clear this wasn't a misunderstanding. People close to Reba say that was the exact moment she stopped pretending there was confusion. Tanya knew who the public was asking about. She knew Reba would see it, and she chose the answer anyway. What made the insult even worse was its history. In the mid-1990s, Reba had already been quietly removed from a shared hosting role at a major country music Hall of Fame event. Insiders later alleged that Tanya's team offered exclusive tabloid access in exchange for making Tanya the sole host. Reba said nothing then. She absorbed it. She moved on. But 2014 was different. After that post, Reba cut all contact. No calls, no explanations requested, no reconciliation attempted. Years later, when asked about rivalry among women in country music, Reba offered a single sentence that said everything. "I believe in lifting each other up. I also believe people show you who they are." Tanya didn't just take a spotlight. She used mockery to publicly erase Reba's place in history. And that is why she ranks number 1. The second name on Reba McEntire's list is Vince Gill, not because of something he said, but because of what he never said at all. The fracture began at the 2001 CMA Awards, a night designed to reinforce Reba's standing as one of country music's most powerful voices. She was scheduled for a televised duet. It had been rehearsed, approved, promoted. Her team had confirmed timing, wardrobe, and staging. Everything was locked in. Then, just hours before the final run-through, her name vanished from the set list. No warning, no explanation. The duet went forward without her, with Vince Gill standing alone under the lights. What could have remained a painful professional change became something far worse in the aftermath. Vince did not call, he did not explain. He did not apologize. Later, in a rare moment of candor, Reba described the experience with a line that carried enormous weight. The silence was louder than any insult. That sentence mattered because Reba has never demanded protection or favors. She has only ever demanded respect. Being replaced could have been survivable. Being replaced and ignored was not. Industry insiders confirmed that at the time, Vince's influence within CMA and Opry-adjacent circles was growing rapidly. Even a brief objection could have forced a conversation. Even a private acknowledgement could have preserved trust. None came. Reba interpreted the silence as consent, if not orchestration. The aftermath was quiet, just like the betrayal itself. She didn't leak complaints. She didn't create drama. She simply closed the door. Their interactions became formal, distant, or rare. Collaborations stopped. Warmth vanished. And the relationship never recovered. Years later, when asked about painful industry moments, Reba referenced a performance that never aired and declined to elaborate. Those close to her knew exactly what she meant. The refusal to name Vince publicly was deliberate. She believed actions spoke clearly enough. That night taught Reba a rule she never forgot. When someone benefits from your disappearance and says nothing they've already chosen aside, the third name tied to a lasting fracture in Reba McEntire's world is Travis Tritt. Not because of a public insult, not because of a headline feud, but because of decisions made quietly, behind closed doors, where power speaks without witnesses. In the early 2000s, Reba was invited to join a high-profile, all-star country project. It was designed to celebrate tradition, grit, and legacy, an acknowledgement that her place in the genre was not just earned, but unquestionable. Reba accepted immediately. There was no hesitation. Then the final lineup was released. Her name was gone. There was no call from producers, no explanation from management. Reba didn't even hear it officially. She found out through a studio employee, someone visibly uncomfortable, delivering news that should never have been secret. Multiple insiders later confirmed what Reba already suspected. Travis Tritt had objected to her inclusion, arguing that the project should remain a male-driven anthem. His opinion carried weight, and the producers listened. That decision alone would have been painful, but it didn't stop there. Months later, Reba agreed to perform at a Georgia charity event connected to Tritt's management circle. She cleared her schedule. She rehearsed. She committed fully. Then, just days before the show, her appearance was quietly canceled. The explanation was vague. Her performance no longer fit the program. Again, no one called Reba directly. That silence mattered. When asked later about Travis Tritt during a press interaction, Reba offered only one sentence. "We don't sing in the same key." Those who knew her understood the meaning immediately. She wasn't talking about music. She was talking about values. about who believes country music has room for women at its center, and who believes the genre should be guarded like private property. Travis never insulted Reba publicly. He didn't need to. His actions communicated clearly enough. She was welcome until she wasn't convenient. They never repaired the relationship. They don't collaborate. They don't share stages. For Reba, this wasn't about personal dislike. It was about the deliberate use of influence to erase someone who didn't fit another person's definition of belonging. And once she saw that line drawn, she never stepped across it again. Number 4 on Reba McEntire's list isn't just a name. It's a decision made inside the Grand Ole Opry itself, tied to Pete Fisher and Dan Rogers, and to a moment that should have been sacred. The fracture happened in May 2022 during the memorial honoring Naomi Judd. This wasn't a normal Opry night. This wasn't an award show. This was grief. Naomi wasn't just a legend to Reba. She was a peer, a confidant, a woman whose private battles Reba understood in a way most people never could. So when Reba was invited to perform a closing tribute, it carried a kind of emotional weight you don't rehearse away. The song was chosen carefully. The rehearsals were private. Everything about it was meant to be respectful, controlled, and meaningful. Then, less than 24 hours before the memorial, the structure of the program changed. Reba's role was quietly reduced. Her performance was shortened. Her placement was shifted earlier, stripping the tribute of the meaning it was supposed to hold as a final farewell. No phone call, no conversation, no human decency. Reba didn't learn about it from a person. She learned from an updated rundown emailed to her team. And according to people close to the situation, Pete Fisher and Dan Rogers pushed that revision. There had already been tension behind the scenes. Pete Fisher had clashed with Reba before over scheduling and visibility. Dan Rogers had reportedly complained privately that Reba appeared too often during high-profile Opry broadcasts. At Naomi's memorial, those resentments resurfaced at the worst possible time. It wasn't artistic, it was political. And here's the part that makes Reba's reaction even more telling. She still walked onto that stage. She still sang with restraint and grace. She didn't lash out. She didn't show anger. She didn't turn someone else's tragedy into her own headline. But when the performance ended, Reba left the venue. She declined interviews. She skipped the after-event dinner. And weeks later, on a podcast, she finally let the truth slip through in a rare moment of vulnerability. That night broke my heart in more ways than one, because the meaning was unmistakable. This wasn't just about a stage time, it was about losing the right to say goodbye publicly, about having grief negotiated, trimmed, and rearranged like a TV segment. Reba still respects the Opry as an institution. She still steps onto that stage, but those close to her say the trust never returned. Something fundamental shifted that night. An emotional boundary was crossed and remembered. The fifth and final place on Reba McEntire's unforgivable list belongs to a moment where money, calendars, and silence collided. And Garth Brooks was standing at the center of it. It started the way big Nashville moves always start, quietly, privately, between people who are powerful enough to speak without managers in the room. In the early 2000s, Reba and Garth discussed the idea of a co-headlining tour. Not a fantasy, not a rumor, a real plan taking shape behind the scenes. Routing was considered. Scheduling was discussed. The kind of conversations that only happen when both sides believe something is moving forward. And Reba did, what professionals do when they trust the person across from them. She adjusted her commitments, she cleared a space, she made room for a future that was being promised in private. Then the momentum vanished. Announcements appeared. The tour concept survived, but Reba's name did not. She didn't get a warning call. She didn't get a hold tight. She didn't get the basic courtesy of a conversation. She learned the way the public did, after the decision had already hardened into reality. Sources alleged that Garth redirected the tour after reassessing commercial control and branding, choosing a configuration that gave him clearer authority. And here's what's important. What angered Reba wasn't the pivot, it was the method. Because when Reba cleared her schedule and the plan evaporated without notice, she didn't just lose a tour, she looked exposed, professionally blindsided in an industry that punishes surprise and treats uncertainty like weakness. The damage landed immediately because trust had been treated as expendable. Years later, Reba addressed this kind of injury without naming names, writing a line that sounded less like a quote and more like a scar. A promise made in private can still destroy you in public. That sentence mattered because it described the consequence perfectly. It wasn't about personal humiliation. It was about the quiet erosion of credibility when plans dissolve without explanation. Reba never confronted Garth publicly. She never hinted at it in interviews. She never weaponized the story, but the temperature changed. Joint ideas stalled, invitations cooled, professional warmth became formality. Insiders claim this episode permanently changed how Reba did business with Nashville's biggest power players. Handshakes gave way to contracts, optimism yielded to verification, and silence stopped being interpreted as patience. This was the moment that taught her a final rule. Never rely on trust alone again, because Reba McEntire didn't shout. She didn't accuse. She simply chose not to forget. If you look at these 5 names one by one, it's easy for outsiders to dismiss them as isolated drama. A bad night, a canceled slot, a tour that changed direction, a tribute that got rearranged. But Reba McEntire didn't live these moments as separate incidents. She lived them as a pattern, because the details are different, but the message underneath is always the same. You can be legendary and still be treated like you're replaceable. You can be the backbone of the genre and still be edited out of the story. You can give the industry everything, and it will still test how much disrespect you'll swallow with a smile. Tanya Tucker wasn't just rude, she made sure the insult lived in public, where it would stick. Vince Gill didn't just take a moment. He took it and then let silence do the dirty work, as if Reba's disappearance required no explanation at all. Travis Tritt didn't need to shout. He used influence like a locked door, deciding who belonged and who didn't, without ever saying the quiet part out loud. Pete Fisher and Dan Rogers didn't simply rearrange a program, they reduced a farewell to a scheduling problem, trimming a grieving woman's goodbye like it was a commercial break. And with Garth Brooks, it wasn't betrayal through cruelty. It was betrayal through calculation, letting a promise dissolve until Reba learned the truth from the world, not from the man who made it. That's why Reba never went to war, because the war wasn't loud. It was quiet, polished, professional, and surgical. Reba McEntire exposes the 5 Oprah, and here's what makes Reba different from almost everyone else in that world. She didn't retaliate by destroying people. She retaliated by changing herself. She stopped trusting handshakes. She stopped believing silence meant respect. She stopped confusing tradition with loyalty. And maybe that's the darkest truth behind country music's family image. Not that people fight, but that the biggest damage happens when powerful people learn they can erase you and no one will question it. So let me ask you this. Do you think silence is more powerful than confrontation in Nashville? And if you had to guess, who do you believe hurt Reba the most? Public humiliation, quiet erasure, gatekeeping, institutional control, or a broken promise? Reba McEntire never stood on a stage and called anyone out by name. She never demanded apologies. She never asked the industry to choose sides. Instead, she did something far more dangerous. She remembered. In a business built on smiles, handshakes, and polite silence, Reba learned that the most powerful weapon isn't confrontation. It's clarity. She learned who showed respect only when cameras were on, who benefited when her name disappeared, who treated grief, loyalty, and promises like negotiable assets. And once she understood that pattern, she stopped playing the same game. Reba didn't burn bridges, she simply stopped crossing them. She kept her dignity, she protected her legacy, and she quietly rewrote the rules of how she trusted Nashville ever again. That's why these 5 moments still matter today. Not because they expose a scandal, but because they reveal how easily even legends can be erased when power goes unquestioned. So now the question belongs to you. Do you believe silence is more powerful than confrontation? Which betrayal do you think cut the deepest? Public humiliation, quiet erasure, gatekeeping, institutional control, or a broken private promise? Leave your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more untold stories hidden behind country music's polished curtain, make sure you subscribe. Because some legends don't fade away. They just stop protecting the lie.